In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the Spook Zone. I am your humble host, and this is the first show of the semester. I have a guest. He won't be saying much things unless he wants to.
No, very little, I would think.
Okay. He's just going to be here listening to me doing my thing, which is fine, because he's my favourite critic. Yeah, no, that's that's slightly wrong. Well, yeah. Right. Before we get started, I'd just like to say that we are not going to start with the Necronomicon for today. I have an idea for doing a Poe story instead, because Poe's always nice, and he does good short stories, which are super scary, and are usually not that racist, which is, you know what, that's a theme I like. I like not that racist things.
Only your daily amount of racism, I think, every day.
Thank you, buddy. I do not partake in daily racism. That is not a thing I do. That is a fraud that is being put out into the air. It doesn't happen. Don't you laugh. Okay, where was it? Because there was one there that was good, and I remember what it was, and I'm trying to think of what one it was. Where is it? It was a horror story that was, I think it was in the 30s? Horror story about, there it is. Yes, it's this one. Oh, jeez. Right, so this story was published in 1835, and it is called Berenice. I think that's how you pronounce it.
I'm not going to comment. I'm probably worse.
Okay, gotcha. I'm going to assume that's how you pronounce it. Maybe it is. Don't shake your head at me. I will be very cross. Yeah, we're going to read it. And I am not entirely sure what we're going to do after that, because I am a bit late. I'm about 10 minutes late, thanks to buses, which are always good. First Bus, sponsor us.
Excellent bus service.
Yes, we really appreciate you. We're not being sarcastic. Sponsor us, please. Please don't sponsor us. We don't want you to sponsor. No, ignore that. That was just a voice in your head. Right, we're going to be reading Bernice with some fun music in the background. It's going to be a good time. Hopefully, it's not going to be awful. It might be. I have little experience with this story, so it might be terrible. But there's a good chance that it won't be. We'll find out. Oh God, it's been ages since I've been in the hot seat, so to speak. So I'm going to be rusty. Either way, I'll try and make this an enjoyable time. Hopefully you won't just want to explode. You may do. If you do, that's fine. Well, it's not. I'll be taking full responsibility for that, and that'll be bad. But anyway, enjoy this story. This is Berenice by Edgar Allan Poe. Misery is manifold. The wretchedness of earth is multiform. Overreaching the wide horizon as the rainbow, its hues are as various as the hues of that arch, as distinct too, yet intimately blended. Overreaching the wide horizon as the rainbow. How is it that from beauty I have derived a type of unloveliness, from the covenant peace of a simile of sorrow? But as in ethics, evil is a consequence of good. So, in fact, out of joy is sorrow born. Either the memory of past bliss is the anguish of today, or the agonies which have their origin in the ecstasies that might have been. My baptismal name is Aegeus. That of my family I will not mention. Yet there are no towers in the land more time-honoured than my gloomy grey hereditary halls. Our line has been called a race of visionaries, and in many striking particulars, in the character of the family mansion, in the frescoes of the chief saloon, in the tapestries of the dormitories, in the chiselling of some buttresses in the armory, but more especially in the gallery of antique paintings, in the fashion of the library chamber, and lastly, in the very peculiar nature of the library's contents. There is more than sufficient evidence to warrant that belief. The recollections of my earliest years are connected with that chamber, and with its volumes, of which latter I will say no more. Here died my mother. Herein was I born. But it is a mere idleness to say that I had not lived before, that the soul has no previous existence. You deny it? Let us not argue the matter. Convinced myself, I seek not to convince. There is, however, a remembrance of aerial forms, of spiritual and meaning eyes, of sounds, musical yet sad, a remembrance which will not be excluded, a memory like a shadow, vague, variable, indefinite, unsteady, and like a shadow, too, in the impossibility of my getting rid of it, while the sunlight of my reason shall exist. In that chamber was I born, thus awakening from the long night of what seemed, but was not, nonentity, at once into the very regions of fairylands, into a place of imagination, into the wild dominions of the monastic thought and erudition. It is not singular that I gazed around me with a startled and ardent eye, that I loitered away from my boyhood in books and dissipated my youth in reverie. But it is singular that as years rolled away and the noon of manhood found me still in the mansion of my fathers, it is wonderful what stagnation there fell upon the springs of my life. Wonderful how total an inversion took place in the character of my commonest thought. The realities of the world affected me as visions, and as visions only, while the wild ideas of the land of dreams became, in turn, not the material of my everyday existence, but in very deed that existence utterly and solely in itself. Berenice and I were cousins, and we grew up together in my paternal halls. Yet differently we grew. I, of ill health and buried in gloom. She, agile, graceful, and overflowing with energy. Hers, the ramble on the hillside. Mine, the studies of the cloister. I, living within my own heart and addicted body and soul to the most intense and painful mediation. She, roaming carelessly through life with no thought of the shadows in her path, of the silent fight of the raven-winged hours. Berenice, I call upon her name. Berenice, and from the grey ruins of a memory, 1,000 tumultuous recollections are started at that sound. Vividly is her image before me now, as in the early days of her lightheartedness and joy. Gorgeous, yet fantastic beauty. Sylph amid the shrubberies of Arnheim. Naiad among its fountains. And then all is mystery and terror, and a tale which should not be told. Disease, a fatal disease, fell like the simoom upon her frame, and even while I gazed upon her, the spirit of change swept over her, pervading her mind, her habits, and her character, and in a manner the most subtle and terrible, disturbing even the identity of her person. Alas, the destroyer came and went, and the victim, where was she? I knew her not, or knew her no longer as Berenice. Among the numerous train of maladies superinduced by that fatal and primary one, which affected a revolution of so horrible a kind in the moral and physical being of my cousin, may be mentioned as the most distressing and obstinate in its nature. A species of epilepsy, not unfrequently terminating in trance itself, trance very nearly resembling positive disillusion, and from which her manner of recovery was in most instances startlingly abrupt. In the meantime, my own disease, for I have been told that I should call it by no other appellation, my own disease then grew rapidly upon me. and assumed finally a monochromatic character of a novel and extraordinary form, hourly and momentarily gaining vigour, and at length obtaining over me the most incomprehensible ascendry. This monomania, if I must term it, consisted in a morbid irritability of those properties of the mind in the metaphysical science termed the attentive. It is more than probable that I am not understood, but I fear, indeed, that it is in no manner possible to convey to the mind of the merely general reader an adequate idea of that nervous intensity of interest which, in my case, the powers of mediation, not to speak technically, busied and buried themselves in the contemplation of even the most ordinary objects of the universe. To muse for long, unwearied hours with my attention riveted to some frivolous device on the margin or in the topography of a book, to become absorbed for the better part of a summer's day in a quaint shadow falling aslant upon the tapestry, or upon a door, to lose myself for an entire night in watching the steady flame of a lamp, or the embers of a fire, to dream away whole days over the perfume of a flower, to repeat monotonously some common word until the sound, by dint of frequent repetition, ceased to convey any idea whatever to the mind, to lose all sense of motion or physical existence by means of an absolute bodily quintessence so long and obstinately preserved in. Such were a few of the most common and least pernicious vagaries induced by a condition of the mental faculties, not indeed altogether unparalleled, but certainly bidding defiance to anything like analysis or explanation. Yet, let me not be misapprehended. The undue, earnest, and morbid attention thus excited by objects in their own nature frivolous must not be confounded in character with that ruminating prosperity common to all mankind, and more especially indulged in it by persons of ardent imagination. It was not even, as might first be supposed, an extreme condition or exaggeration of such propensity, but primarily and essentially distinct and different. In the one instance, the dreamer or enthusiast, being interested by an object usually not frivolous, imperceptibly loses sight of this object in a wilderness of deductions and suggestions issuing therefrom until, at the conclusion of a daydream, often replete with luxury, he finds the incommentimum, or first cause of his musings entirely vanished and forgotten. In my case, the primary object was invariably frivolous, although assuming, through the medium of my distempered vision, refracted and unreal importance. Few deductions, if any, were made, and those few pertinaciously returning in upon the original object as a centre. The mediations were never pleasurable, and at the termination of the reverie, the first cause, so far from being out of sight, had attained the supernaturally exaggerated interest which was the prevailing feature of the disease. In a word, the powers of the mind more particularly exercised were, with me, as I have said before, the attentive, and are, with the daydreamer, the speculative. My books, at this epoch, if they did not actually serve to irritate this disorder, partook, it will be perceived largely, in their imaginative and inconsequential nature, of the characteristic qualities of the disorder itself. I well remember, among others, the treatise of the noble Italian Cecilius Secundus Curio. This is very difficult Italian. De Amplitudini Beati Regni Dei. St. Austin's great work, The City of God, and Tertullian, De Carne Christi, in which the paradoxical sentence mortuus est Dei filius, credible est quia ineptum est, et sepultus resurrectit certum est qua impossibile est, occupied my undivided time for many weeks of laborious and fruitless investigation. Thus it will appear that, shaking from its balance only by trivial things, my reason bore resemblance to that ocean crag, spoken of by Ptolemy Hephaestion, which, steadily resisting the attacks of human violence and the fiercer fury of the waters and winds, trembled only to the touch of the flower and cold asphodel. And although to a careless thinker it might appear a matter beyond doubt that the alteration produced by an unhappy malady in the moral condition of Bernice would afford me many objects for the exercise of that intense and abnormal mediation whose nature I have been at some trouble in explaining, yet was not in any degree the case. In the lucid intervals in my infirmity, her calamity indeed gave me pain, and taking deeply to heart the total wreck of her fair and gentle life, I did not fail to ponder frequently and bitterly upon the wonder-working means by which so strange a revolution had been so suddenly brought to pass. But these reflections partook not of the idiosyncrasy of my disease, and were such as would be occurred, under similar circumstances, to the ordinary mass of mankind. True to its own character, my disorder revelled in the less important but more startling changes wrought in the physical frame of Bernice, in the singular and most appalling distortion of her personal identity. During the brightest days of her unparalleled beauty, most surely I'd never loved her. In the strange anomaly of my existence, feelings with me had never been that of the heart, and my passions always were of the mind. Through the grey and early morning, among the trellised shadows of the forest at noonday, and in the silence of my library at night, she had fitted my eyes, and I had seen her, not as the living, breathing Bernice, but as the Bernice of a dream. Not as being of the earth, earthy, but as the abstraction of such a being, not as a thing to admire, but to analyze, not as an object of love, but as the theme of the most abstruse, although desultory speculation. And now I shuddered in her presence, and grew pale at her approach. Yet bitterly lamenting her fallen and desolate condition, I called to mind that she had loved me long, and in an evil moment I spoke to her of marriage. At length, the period of our nuptials was approaching, when upon an afternoon in the winter of the year, one of those unseasonably warm, calm, and misty days which are the nurse of the beautiful Hakilon, I sat, as I thought, alone, in the inner apartment of the library. But, uplifting my eyes, I saw that Bernice stood before me. Was it my own excited imagination, or the misty influence of the atmosphere, or the uncertain twilight of the chamber, or the grey draperies which fell around her figure that caused in it so vacillating and indistinct an outline? I could not tell. She spoke no word. I, not for words, could have uttered a syllable. An icy chill ran through my frame. A sense of insufferable anxiety oppressed me. A consuming curiosity pervaded my soul, and sinking back upon the chair, I remained for some time breathless and motionless, with my eyes riveted upon her person. Alas, its emaciation was excessive, and not one vestige of the former being lurked in any single line of the contour. My burning glances at length fell upon the face. The forehead was high and very pale and singularly placid, and the once jetty hair fell partially over it, and overshadowed the hollow temples with innumerable ringlets, now of a vivid yellow, and jarring discordantly in their fantastic character was the reigning melancholy of the countenance. The eyes were lifeless and lustreless and seemingly pupilless. I shrank involuntarily from their glassy stare to the contemplation of the thin and shrunken lips. They parted, and in a smile of peculiar meaning, the teeth of the changed Bernice disclosed themselves slowly to my view. Would to God that I had never beheld them, or that, having done so, I had died. The shutting of a door disturbed me, and looking up, I found that my cousin had departed from the chamber. But from the disordered chamber of my brain I had not. alas, departed, and would not be driven away the white and ghastly spectrum of the teeth. Not a speck on their surface, not a shade on their enamel, not an indenture in their edges, but what that period of a smile had sufficed to brand upon my memory. I saw them now even more unequivocally than I beheld them then. The teeth! The teeth! They were here, and there, and everywhere, and visibly and palpably before me, long, narrow, excessively white, with pale lips writhing about them, as in the very moment of their first terrible development. Then came the full fury of my monomania, and I struggled in vain against its strange and irresistible influence. In the multiplied objects of the external world I had no thoughts but for the teeth. For these I longed with a frenzied desire. All other matters and all other different interests became absorbed in this single contemplation. They alone were present to the mental eye, and they, in their sole individuality, became the essence of my mental life. I held them in every light. I turned them in every attitude. I surveyed their characteristics. I dwelled upon their peculiarities. I pondered upon their conformation. I mused upon the alteration in their nature. I shuddered as I assigned to them in imagination a sensitive and sentient power, and even when unassisted by the lips, a capacity of moral expression. Of Medsel Saf, it has been well said, "Que tu sais pas est-il des sentiments." And of Berenice I more seriously believed, "Que tu sais non éteint d'id." D-I-D. Here was the idiotic thought that had destroyed me. D-I-D. Therefore it was that I coveted them so madly. I felt that their possession could alone ever restore me to peace, in giving me back to reason. And the evening closed in upon me thus, and then the darkness came, and tarried and went, and the day again dawned. And the mists of the second night were now gathering around, and I still sat motionless in that solitary room, and still I sat buried in mediation, and still the phantasma of the teeth maintained its terrible ascendancy, as, with the most vivid, hideous distinctness, it floated about them amid the changing lights and shadows of the chamber. At length there broke in upon my dreams a cry, as of horror and dismay, and thereunto, after a pause, succeeded the sound of troubled voices, intermingled with many low moanings of a sorrow or of pain. I arose from my seat, and throwing open one of the doors of the library, saw standing out in the antechamber, a servant maid, all in tears, who told me that Berenice was no more. She had been seized with epilepsy in the early morning, and now, at the closing in of the night, the grave was ready for its tenant, and all the preparations for the burial were completed. I found myself sitting in the library, and again sitting there alone. It seemed that I newly awakened from a confused and exciting dream. I knew that it was now midnight, and I was well aware that since the setting of the sun Berenice had not been interred. But of that dreary period which intervened I had no positive, at least no definite comprehension. Yet its memory was still replete with horror. Horror more horrible from being vague, and terror more terrible from ambiguity. It was a fearful page in the record of my existence, written all over with dim and hideous and unintelligible recollections. I strived to decipher them, but in vain, while ever and anon, like the spirit of a departed sound, the shrill and piercing shriek of a female voice seemed to be ringing in my ears. I had done a deed. What was it? I asked myself the question aloud, and the whispering echoes of the chamber answered me. What was it? On the table beside me burned a lamp, and near it lay a little box. It was of no remarkable character, and I had seen it frequently before, for it was the property of the family physician. But how came it here, upon my table, and why did I shudder in regarding it? These things were in no manner to be accounted for, and my eyes at length dropped to the open pages of a book. and to a sentence underscored therein. The words were singular, yet simple ones, of the poet Ibn Zad. Dispant mihi sodales si sepulchrum amice visiterum cures mias aquitala aliquantulum fore levitas. Why then, as I perused them, did the hairs of my head erect themselves on end, and the blood of my body become congealed within my veins? There came a light tap at the library door, and pale as the tenant of a tomb, a menial entered upon tiptoe. His looks were wild with terror, and he spoke to me in a voice tremulous, husky, and very low. What said he? Some broken sentences I heard. He told of a wild cry disturbing the silence of a night, of the gathering together of the household, of the search of the direction of the sound, and then his tones grew thrillingly distinct as he whispered me of a violated grave, of a disfigured body enshrouded, yet still breathing, still palpitating, still alive. He pointed to garments. They were muddy and clotted with gore. I spoke not. He took me gently by the hand. It was indented with the impress of human nails. He directed my attention to some object against the wall. I looked at it for some minutes. It was a spade. With a shriek, I bounded to the table and grasped the box that lay upon it. But I could not force it open, and in my tremor it slipped from my hands and fell heavily, and burst into pieces, and from it, with a rattling sound, there rolled out some instruments of dental surgery, intermingled with 32 small, white, and ivory-looking substances that were scattered to and fro about the floor. That was a story about a man who thought, ooh, those teeth are shiny. Yoink! And apparently the lady was still alive. Oh, crap. Whoops. Smooth moves, man. What was his name again? Aegeus. Very smooth. Very nice.
He really needed money from the Tooth Fairy, desperately.
He just was like, I need it. I need to get like 36 quid, if that's the logic. Like, it's a quid. It's like a quid from the Tooth Fairy, right?
It is.
Right, so it would be a quid from the Tooth Fairy. I'm going to double check and see what monomania actually means, because I have never heard of this disease before. Exaggerated or obsessive enthusiasm for or preoccupation with one thing.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. Was a form of partial insanity. Is this an actual thing? Is it still an actual thing? That's what I want to know. Oh yeah, there are certain things, aren't there? Like kleptomania, pyromania, lipomania. Ooh, interesting. Oh, that's what people think is called depression nowadays. Interesting. So that's what monomania is. It's about a guy who just obsesses, and this guy obsessed over a lady's teeth, and took them for his own reasons.
Nice man.
Nice man. I must admit, Edgar Allan Poe has a habit of writing characters who are absolutely nutso. Like, one of his stories is about a guy who really hates his cat, so he hits his cat, and he
What a fantastic description of a story.
Yeah, that's it. It's an interesting story, because it's like, if you're reading it out loud, it's like, oh dear, because you're basically just describing a cat being attacked. I'm sure reading it is a little bit more bearable, but saying it out loud, like, I am doing these things, is a bit weird. And it's certainly weird in this case, because it's about a guy stealing teeth.
Yeah.
What did you think about that story? Real quick.
What did I think about it?
Yeah.
I was trying to get past all the interesting pronunciations you had in certain places.
Okay, understand that there are so many terrible freaking languages in this. Not that I hate language, but like, I don't expect like a horror story that's written in English to have so much like references to stuff that's in Latin and in German. It hurts. Hurts my soul.
And you've not come across any Edgar Allan Poe that's done this before?
No, this was a first.
Oh.
I think this is something to do with like the whole fact that this guy was like obsessed with books as well, so that's why he's constantly quoting them, and that's why it kind of makes no sense to me, at least, and that probably wouldn't make sense to another reader who didn't know the language. Yeah, it was an interesting character study
of
a guy who was obsessive.
Who obsesses with teeth.
Yeah,
when you need to characterize and study those people.
Yeah, they exist.
Do they? And now you're gonna Google people obsessed with teeth. Very nice.
Why is America obsessed with perfect teeth?
I think
obsession with teeth disorder. Dentorexic. When someone has white teeth but they think their teeth are yellow, so they obsess over brushing their teeth / whitening them.
Good to know.
Good to know. We don't have that, do we?
No, I don't care if my teeth are yellow or not, really. They're hideous vampire teeth. Don't mind.
Yeah, we have vampire teeth. We have 2 canines. It's weird. I wonder who gave us that. Like, it's a weird gene to have.
Probably no one, and they just came in our sleep and filed our teeth to points one day.
They're making us attack dogs of some sort.
No, vampires.
Yeah? Oh, yeah. Right, okay. So, we've got enough time for another story, so I'm going to peruse the internet, which is always a great idea. Thomas is laughing. That doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? Right?
Peruse the internet. What could you find?
Well, there's often really good stories online when it comes to certain things. Like, oftentimes it does mean that I have to put on terrible accents for the Americans because they're. No offense, but like a lot of these stories are based in America. This is way too long. I can't read that. I have it's 20 minutes. I have tops, 10 minutes, and maybe something else, but I don't know. I'm just debating what I could do. How long is this?
Long.
Not as long.
Not long.
Not that long. Maybe I could read this. That's a thumbs up. Okay, we're gonna do this. Right. Okay. Cool. I'm pleased. Maybe this will give me inspiration to continue writing my horror story. FYI, I am writing something right now of a little short thing. Hopefully, I'll be able to get it out sometime, and maybe I'll read it on the show. And maybe you'll be like, ooh, that's neat. And then you'll probably never say anything else again because my show has put you off the show forever. Hopefully not, but it might happen. My stories aren't that bad. I was just being sarcastic.
I'm just saying how you said my show will put you off my show for good.
Yes.
Right. That's basically just saying your show's
terrible.
Right.
It's not that bad, maybe.
No, I don't. Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. We're gonna read this. Sorry. It's called Roommates. It's by Shannon Higdon. Higdon?
Yes.
Higdon. Great. Hopefully this will be a fun time. Maybe it will be. I can't tell. Can you? Probably not.
I can.
Oh. This is Roommates by Shannon Higdon. The second Daryl's keys were rattling in the lock, Katie was off the couch and racing to the front door. Did you do it? Did you do it? She was practically bouncing up and down with the giddy anticipation and unwilling to give him a second to even breathe. Did you kill her? Is it done? Daryl couldn't help but to smile and shake his head. She was such a bad influence on him. He tried to remember the first time they had met, but for some reason was unable to. It just kind of seemed like she was always there. Tim and Jerry had been his roommates for close to 8 years, and somewhere along the way she just kind of fell in with the twin brothers. Before Daryl knew what happened, she was living the little 2-bedroom house as well. Remembering when the guys moved in was a little easier. He had liked them both immensely the first time when they had met, and felt hard for their sob story of growing up as orphans with no real family other than each other. That wasn't the real reason he extended the invitation, however. The truth was, they were fun. Age-wise, they were technically adults, but their maturity level in no way reflected that. Neither of them were ever bothered growing up, and there was really no telling what they might be getting into at any point in time. Plus, they really liked to play up the identical twin aspect and enjoyed going in with the same look as each other every day. Daryl could tell them apart. At the moment, Tim's hair was just a bit shorter than Jerry's, but most people didn't have a clue. Tim had told him once, quite some time ago, the story of how they'd met Katie in the area, but Daryl didn't really retain it. Tim had verbal diarrhea and a different story or 10 every day. It would have been impossible to try and keep them all in the memory banks. Tim's condition was aided considerably by the fact that he had always had a bag of green herbs nearby. Jerry wasn't quite the stoner his brother was, but he did partake from time to time. Daryl hadn't complained when Katie started hanging around. There was something about her that he found truly compelling. It wasn't that he had the hot for her or anything like that. She was not at all his type, but she was sweet and funny, an absolute dynamo of a highly contagious positive energy. He loved the way that she kept them all in line and yet on their toes at the same time. For all these reasons and others that he didn't fully understand, she could talk to him into practically anything. She had an innate ability to persuade him into activities that most people would consider irrational, and a way of making sense of it in the process. That's the way it was with Julie, as soon-to-be deceased ex-girlfriend, and Marcus, his recently deceased ex-best friend. As crushing a blow as discovering this secret liaison was, Daryl was originally going to just break off both relationships and count his blessings that he discovered the infidelity when he did, and did not further down the road, when she might have been his wife and they might have been his best man. It had been Katie who finally got him to see the reasoning behind ending their lives. They were, after all, bad people. Who knows what else they would have done? Who else knows who they would have ended up hurting in the long run? It was the same thing with Yuri Milosh, the Ukrainian guy who used to live down the street, that swindled Daryl out of nearly $3,000 in his Ponzi scheme. How many little old ladies would have cleaned out before somebody finally stopped him? Then there was that Pritchett Ricketts, the prick who kept pinching his clients by undercutting his offers and jobs. Daryl was one of the best small job carpenters in the area, but somehow that damn Ricketts was always on his tail. It was Katie that pointed out the unscrupulous man must have been following Daryl. It also stood to her reasoning that there was no possible way of just cutting the leech out of his life other than killing him, of course. Father Missioner was the only one Daryl tried putting up a significant argument against, and even now it weighed on his conscience. Father Andrew Missioner had been the pastor at the local Catholic church for nearly 40 years before he passed on. Daryl's grandmother, who left the little house to him when she died, attended services there twice a week, every week, until she died and the priest had grown fondly attached to the long-time widow. When Daryl moved in 9 years ago, Father McKenna had made it a point to visit the home and check in on Doris's grandson, and Daryl quite liked the pleasant man. Not enough to attend his church, but he did like him. It was Tim and Jerry who initially didn't care for him. The first time they'd met, the father made a light-hearted joke about them being freeloaders that didn't pay rent, and despite the lack of malicious intent, the guys, who never took offense at anything, had their feelings hurt. That was really no big deal, but the priest continued to make weekly recruiting visits, and eventually Katie was the one to see demons in him. Absolutely terrified the first time she saw the man and the creatures possessing him from within, she later explained that the gift was called discernment, and that she'd always been able to see unclean spirits. Daryl fought her for some time on the issue, but her fear was real, and Katie never lied to him, or anyone for that matter. She was truthful to a brutal fault, and in the end he believed. He believed in a world beyond the one he could. He believed that Katie had gifts that he didn't, and above all, he believed her when she said they would be plagued by demonic attacks if the poor man wasn't put out of his misery. It was, by her estimation, a mercy killing, Darryl had been hoping that moment of bestowed mercy would be the last time he would ever have to deal with such unpleasant things, but here he was again. "So," she pressed, "are you going to answer me or what?" Darryl chuckled again and pushed past her to the living room. "Are you going to give me a chance to actually answer?" Katie feigned offense behind him and said, "Well, excuse me, by all means." Tim and Jerry were wrestling with each other on the couch like a couple of teenage boys and didn't bring it to an end until Darryl plopped down on the couch next to them, diverting their attention. "Well?" Jerry said. Jerry asked what they were all thinking. He hasn't said. Katie had positioned herself on the lazy boy across from them. For some reason he's trying to play it all cool, which, she paused to perfect, is not cool. The brothers began to fall over each other with rancorous laughter, which brought Darryl's attention to the empty baggie and green herbs strung about the coffee table. They were high as kites. Sometimes living with the two was like being at a frat house or having children, maybe. He definitely didn't take them as seriously as he did his female roommate. Well, Darryl finally spoke. Not that you two yahoos will remember later. He was looking at the twins, and they fell into another round of side-splitting. But yeah, I did it. I cut a brake lane. Katie's jaw dropped. "You cut a brake lane," she repeated. Darryl proudly nodded yes, but the pride only lasted a moment before Katie made her displeasure unknown. "What the hell, Darryl? That's not what we talked about. You were supposed to poison her or stab her. Where the hell did you come up with cutting the brake line?" She sighed, exasperated. "How do you even know which one is the breakage line?" "YouTube," Darryl replied sheepishly. "I looked it up." The brothers couldn't stop laughing. Jerry actually falling onto the floor and holding his sides. Katie didn't find it funny at all. "You looked up a video of how to cut a brake line and then you went to cut somebody's brake line. Please tell me you at least used a guest account on a computer somewhere else." She seemed like she couldn't even believe she was having to ask, and it was a complete opposite of the reaction he had been expecting. Especially when he could only mumble, "I used my phone." Katie jumped across to the couch and slapped him in the face, drawing blood with her nails. "You fucking idiot," she yelled at his face. "You screwed us all." Tim joined his brother, rolling on the floor as neither seemed to grasp why Katie was so upset. What are we supposed to do when you get arrested?" Darryl was genuinely shocked. Why would he be arrested? I don't understand, was all he could say, and Katie shook her head with sick pity, but was not given the opportunity to explain. The next few seconds passed in a blur. Broken glass filled the room, and the windows and chunks of wood fell from the hall, where the front door had been smashed in from its hinges. Suddenly the room was full of men, flashing lights and screaming. Violently thrown to the floor and handcuffed, Darryl couldn't see what condition his roommates were in. Much like him, they were probably overwhelmed with the sudden flurry of activity. Jerked to his feet and hustled down the hall. He knew that he would probably be in some degree of trouble, but he truly hoped that his friends wouldn't be charged with anything. He didn't see them being cuffed, and his name was the only one they stated as being under arrest and Mirandized, so hopefully they could be let out of whatever mess this turned into. As he was being pulled out of the front door, Darryl called out over his shoulder, desperately hoping they could hear him. "Don't say anything, guys. Don't say a word." By that point, it was the best he could do. An hour later, he was behind bars, barring the death penalty, for the rest of his life. Toya Pearson couldn't help but to curse when the call came in at 1:45 in the morning. Raising two girls as a single mum, combined with a job that could call at any moment, as the current call proved, sleep was proving more and more elusive. The moment the ringtone woke her up from deep sleep, she knew she was done for the night. She didn't even have to answer it. It did, however, turn out to be a rather interesting call, though. The department had arrested a rather notorious serial killer. Not that it wasn't good news. One less sicko on the streets was good for everybody. But that wasn't the part that particularly interested her. It was his pets. Normally, The rare personality that fell into his range didn't keep pets, not living ones anyway, but this man had 3 cats which were currently in the kennel at headquarters. Were it not such a high-profile case, the animals would have most likely been turned over to Animal Control or the Humane Society. But given the uniqueness of the situation, they thought to call her. Toya's official title was that of a detective profiler, but everybody knew that her true passion was the feline rescue group. No one had a problem with turning Katie, Tim, and Jerry over to her, and rather than put them through further trauma, she decided to keep them in the end. They won her over rather quickly with their infectious personalities, and the girls fell in love immediately as well. The youngest, Sarah, even claims they speak to her. It's adorable. The cats are speaking to people. They want you to kill your friends. Yay.
Yep.
That's a twist.
Demon cats.
Demon cats. That I was just thinking that was literally like that just reminded me of, you know, the Ryan Reynolds movie where he has a pet cat and a dog and they both talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly that.
Except now you go killing people.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. In Voices, he kills people as well.
Oh, does he?
Yes. Like the cat specifically has a Scottish accent and goes, "You should murder your friends. Do it now."
What does the dog say?
Don't kill your friends, please. Come on. He's not voiced by Owen Wilson. He just sounds calm.
Doesn't sound like, you weren't doing an Owen Wilson impression there.
Wow.
No.
All right. Okay, we got 5 minutes. I'm not entirely sure what to do in these last 5 minutes.
Don't look at me for suggestions.
I mean, I don't know. Fucking usually, like I can think of something, but it's difficult. It's like, can we do the thing?
Oh, no.
It won't be long.
It's a terrible idea.
Okay, we'll make one sentence, and that's it. And this will end the show.
All right, you better explain.
Right. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to say one word each, and we're basically going to make a small story. And that's it. And that's the end of it. And then I'm going to leave you. Okay. You start.
Once
upon
a
time
there
was
a
rancorous
fellow
by
the
name
of
Francesca,
who
liked
certain
types
of
fruit.
These
fruits
were
not
all
that
interesting,
but
had
especially
interesting
colors,
such
as
red,
yellow,
and
pink,
and
blue,
and
oh no, I can't remember the rest of it. Okay, I can't remember it. I can't remember what comes after this. Oh no. We were just about to sing the Rainbow Song. Okay, 1 minute. Red, orange, and pink and blue. I can sing a rainbow lyrics. Here we go. Okay. Wait, red and yellow. No, it's... Oh, I was wrong. Okay, retract that.
From where are we going from?
Okay, we're going from there. I'll go red. Red,
and
yellow,
and,
pink,
and,
green,
and
purple,
and
orange,
and
blue.
But
they
also
had
rather
large
stalks,
which
were
made
of
rubber.
Surprisingly,
so
they
were
used
to
make
slingshots
for
Francesca's
friends
who
were
anarchists
in
Tunisia,
which
was
a
rather
strange
hobby
for
Tunisians
to
have.
I'm not sure we can continue that.
That's that. That was the Spook Zone. I know it's a little bit of a short show, but I don't mind. We got a couple of stories done. It was fun. My brother has been here, and that was fun. Did you have a good time?
thoroughly spooked.
I'm great. That's how it's supposed to go. If you're going to file complaints, don't. I won't get them.
There's no one to write to.
There's no one to write to. I'm not actually real. I'm a ghost, and ghosts don't have addresses. No, they don't.
Where do they live?
In people.
Where do the people live?
In caves.
You heard it here first, folks. Ghosts only live in people in caves.
Yes. And if you do find a ghost that lives in not a cave, no, not in a person, in a cave, then
write to us.
Write to us.
But we don't.
Because...
But we don't have any word to write to.
Exactly, so you can't.
You're stuffed.
Just, if you see one, scream and run. That was the Spook Zone. I hope you all enjoyed listening. I hope... it wasn't too much of a nightmare with my horrible mispronunciations of words that aren't English. I had fun. Hopefully you had fun. Hopefully you were kind of scared. If not, that's okay. We all have mistakes.
Bye.
Bye. Also stay spooked.